I'm Safira. I'm in my second year. I'm just coming to the end of it, and I'm at Wadham College.
My name is Milena and I study experimental psychology and philosophy, and I'm a mature student.
My name's Eljo. I'm a first year studying experimental psychology at Pembroke College.
Hi, I'm Jamie, and I'm a second year reading philosophy and linguistics at Jesus College.
I'm Corinne. I'm technically a graduate now in experimental psychology from the University of Oxford, and I went to St Anne's College.
Hi, my name is Harveen, and I'm a first year student at St Hilda's College studying psychology and linguistics.
I think experimental psychology is the most interesting course you could possibly study. Obviously, that's a very biased perspective, but it just covers such a broad range of things about topics on the mind and behavior, and it really gives you so much insight into how other people, think and how why they think and behave the way that they do. I was someone who considered doing a few different subjects like English and biology, but psychology is the one that I think it's a perfect blend as well of humanities and science. Someone like me, I kind of was a bit torn between, like I said, biology and English, and I think that psychology gives you, you're writing essays a lot of the time and you're able to think critically, but then you have got this side of it that's very scientific and experimental based. So for me, that was like the perfect balance of the two.
The fact that it is a scientific course and it follows scientific principles, so if that's something that works for you and you have that kind of background, that would work really well. But in the same light, there are such a diverse number of modules. So you've got anything from social psychology to more neuroscience options. So I think that you will find the area that suits you best. I also think that the nature of the teaching at Oxford really works well for this psychology course. You'll be able to go in such depth on each option and learn so much. So it's just a brilliant course.
So the reason I chose to do psychology and linguistics is because it offers a lot more of an interdisciplinary course than most courses in the UK, and you get to approach an area like cognition and an area like the study of the brain from two very different disciplines.
PPL is actually 3 courses rolled into one. So when you apply, you can apply for philosophy and linguistics, psychology and linguistics, or psychology and philosophy. And I applied for philosophy and linguistics. I always knew I wanted to study philosophy from quite a young age. It just fascinated me from the beginning. The questions were something I just couldn't escape, and they really engaged with me. And then I came across linguistics later on, and I just thought it was fascinating. Language is such an interesting medium to study. And the crossover between philosophy and linguistics, and also the little bit of psychology that I did, was just such a fantastic mix that I couldn't help but apply to study here.
So I was interested in studying philosophy and psychology as a joint degree because I thought it was interesting that they ask similar questions and are interested in similar topics, like, for example, what the human mind is like, but they use very different methods. So psychology is really empirical, whereas philosophy is more theoretical. So when you're learning these empirical methods, you're thinking more about how best do you test something to answer this question, or what do the results mean from what we tested, how can you interpret them? Whereas the more theoretical, you can ask more daring things like, what does the concept of a mind even mean? What are intuitions underlying that? And are those intuitions well-founded or not?
I would probably say, for me, final year was brilliant because you've got the way that the course works, you get that foundation in first and second year. So you feel like you've learned a good amount of knowledge in a vast area of psychology. And then in final year, you really get to find your niche and the area that really excites you, and the ability to do a research project in that area and do some advanced options that really stretch your ability. So for me, looking back on the 3 years, that was the point that I found really, really exciting. But I think you needed that background in the first 2 years sort of to get there. But it's nice to get to that stage.
I think the most valuable part of my degree was definitely learning how you work best. Through the exposure of having to work so much, you really learn how to make that work for yourself, and especially how to produce things under time pressure. It's quite amazing that what initially seems like an impossible task, like writing an essay in 4 days, actually becomes something that you are capable of doing with ease?
So something that I'm really enjoying at the moment, I'm learning about learning theory and how you can apply things like classical conditioning that I'm sure a lot of people are aware of already, but taking it in a more modern view and then trying to apply it to things like psychological disorders such as schizophrenia and depression.
One of the best bits of the course so far has been studying the intersection between cognitive science and philosophy. So when I studied linguistics, I studied a paper about the foundations of linguistics as an insight into the mind and how it works. And this gave me a really good insight from one kind of section of the brain, but I then studied the philosophy underlying this and the kind of scientific foundations. And this opened me up to learning about deep learning and connectionist networks, consciousness, and a variety of other really fascinating things, which I just never thought I would be studying.
What I would wish I'd known is that you can come into psychology with so many different subjects, and even though science and maths is kind of preferred or is definitely thought of as helpful, you don't have to have any sort of prerequisite knowledge, and everyone comes from such different backgrounds that you'll all be put on a level playing field by the end of first year.
I wish I had known that tutorials are nothing to be scared of, and actually by throwing yourself into them, it's the best part of learning there. Because I think a lot of students, when I meet them when they've just joined Oxford, I think that's the thing that they're really worried about, because maybe they've had interviews and they find that that's quite stressful. But actually throw yourself into those tutorials, because I think it's the best thing that Oxford has to offer in the nature of their teaching. I would also say specifically about the course, and this might not be for everyone that's applying, but if you haven't had a statistics background, so if you haven't done maths A-level, etc., that part of the course would be really enjoyable as well, regardless of your background. Because I think the thing with psychology is everyone comes from so many different backgrounds of A-levels. People have done more science and some people have done more humanities. So I think don't be worried whatever your background course is, because there will be plenty of support, and I think you'll come to enjoy every part of it, regardless of what A-levels you have.
Excellent. Thank you.
One thing which I really loved learning about is statistics, which I studied in my first year. I didn't do maths A-level, and I didn't think I was very good at statistics, so I was really scared about it. And to be frank, I wasn't looking forward to studying it at all. However, when I did study it, it was so much more interesting than I thought it would be, and it gave me such a fascinating insight into how the world works and the statistics we're confronted with daily.
But I had no idea about specifically the module perception, or like how broad it is, and actually how mathematical it is and computational, because we look at a lot of computational models for how perception works, and then looking at the evidence for that was just really interesting for me.
So the first thing I wish I knew before was that being a mature student is a great idea. I definitely think that because I knew what I wanted to study and I'd been out of high school for a few years, I definitely enjoyed my degree a lot more than I might have under other circumstances. Also, 90% of the tutors I encountered at Oxford really weren't scary or like the horror stories you sometimes hear in advance. I think all of them really tried to make it clear they have my best intentions at heart and really wanted me to learn as best as I could.
I think if I were to go back to tell my younger self anything, it would be that collections, which are the very short examinations at the beginning of term, just as a test of what you remember from last term, they aren't something to be stressed over, and indeed are just a marker of progress.
At round about second year, near the end of second term, so going into your final year, you will look through some supervisors and some options of research projects, and like I said, they're really diverse in what you could be studying. So you could be looking at more social sides, you could be working in neuroscience and using those kind of techniques. So find something that really interests you, but you can also reach out to a supervisor if you've got a great idea as well. So it's so much choice. And then you'll be going through the process of ethics improvement and planning, and then collecting your participants and your data, analyzing it, writing it up, reviewing it. So there's so many processes that you are completely in control of, and you will have help all the way through from your supervisors. You're not alone in that sense, and you've got plenty of guidance, but it's really driven by you, which is a really exciting place to be. And at the end you will have a written project, and that's your little baby that you've created, and that's really exciting.
Just submitted my ethics application for my research project, which is something that we have to do throughout third year. And my project's going to be about how maths anxiety affects people, and specifically how it affects their attentional processes, even when they're completing tasks that aren't maths related, and when you just have sort of distractive stimuli in the background. It's been very insightful to know how, when you actually do research, the lengths that you have to go to get approval for it, and all the things that you have to consider, even from what you're actually going to study all the way down to how are you going to handle that data and keep the data from participants, and keep it secure.
I would say the number one thing with personal statements is to be completely true to yourself and just explain why you're passionate about that subject area. So I wouldn't think too deeply about trying to show off or read something because it looks good. Anything that you have previously done or watched or read or heard of that excited you, and that was the reason that you applied for this course, put that in, and that will shine through, and that will make more of an impact on the people reviewing your application than just regurgitating information because you think it sounds good. I think, so for me, I put a book that I read that was really, really interesting, but then I also put a documentary that was, just a really simple overview of neuroscience, but that was the first thing that I watched that made me really excited about that subject area. So I put quite a lot of effort on that. But any type of experience you've had, it's worthwhile putting it in, and just be true to yourself.
What I did to prepare, maybe in like the summer, I just read a few books that were quite interesting to me. Not anything specific like, oh, I need to read this book because there's this topic that's coming up. I just read, particularly one of my most, what I'm most interested in topic wise is sleep, because I did a research project for the IB. It's called an EE on sleep. So I did a lot of reading on sleep, and I just continued that throughout the summer, just reading about sleep. And so even though it's not something that we covered, I just think that reading, or just doing the process of reading analytically, really helped me do well in the academic atmosphere.
You don't have to have any experience specifically about it. You can just be interested in it and talk about what things you've thought about in the different fields or what questions you've come upon, and that doesn't have to come from school specifically. So a lot of what I found is just freely available online. You can Google philosophy or psychology lectures, and those two subjects are actually ones that have a lot of stuff available online. Like MIT, for example, puts a lot of their material online for introductory psychology courses, and Harvard has a free moral philosophy lecture course on YouTube. And so I looked into those and then thought about which aspects that came up in those I thought were really interesting and what I thought about those topics, and mentioned that in my personal statement.
So I essentially applied for 5 different courses at 5 different universities. So in a sense, it was quite difficult to balance my personal statement. So I tried to ensure that all the linguistics I was talking about was the linguistics which has a crossover with philosophy, because I was applying for some single honours philosophy courses. As I understand it, they're very understanding of this sort of thing, but appreciating the overlap between something like philosophy and linguistics shows that you have an understanding of both, as well as a deep insight into a specialism of philosophy, for example.
For the first thing I did is I looked online and I downloaded some of the past papers and had a quick look through them and see what I was up against, basically, what questions they were asking. And then I had to go to past papers. And one thing that I did is I bought a book which also compiled some newer answers that weren't online, newer questions that weren't online, and I talked you through ways you can work through the questions and how to manage your time effectively. Because one of the big things about the TSA is that it is under time. And um, what they said in the book is that if you had unlimited time, you could probably score full marks in TSA. So really, time management is the most important aspect of it.
If you run out of TSA exams, which you likely won't, you can also look online at SAT practice. The SAT is an exam that's generally taken for American universities, but the structure and the kind of critical thinking that it tests is very similar to the TSA itself. So you can always look at SAT tips because there might be more of those online.
The best way to prepare for it is just to practice the style of questions. So half of the questions on the TSA are problem solving, and half of them are thinking skills and sort of rationality, etc. And I think with both actually style of questions, the more you practice, the more you realize that there is quite a trend in how you go about them. For Oxford, you will also have to write a small essay at the end. And the same thing with that, I would say look through some of the past essays that they've done, because you'll get a sort of vibe of what the questions are like. I wouldn't say, go read widely to prepare for these essays, because that's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for not necessarily content, but how you approach a question. So regardless of what you include, even if you come out of it going, I don't think that really is what they were looking for, how you express your opinions, because you do have them, just stick to them and explain your thought process, and then, yeah, you'll be fine.
I actually still joke to my friends that interviews were the best part of Oxford that I've ever seen, because when I was here, the weather was beautiful. The people I met at interviews are still people I'm friends with at college and at the other college that I interviewed at. And I think genuinely my best advice is to take a deep breath, walk in, and recognize that these people want you there as much as you want to be there. And it's not a competition, it's not a contest. It's a conversation where you are telling them, hey, I love this subject and you love this subject. Let's talk about why.
So I had 4 interviews. 2 of those were at St Anne's and 2 of those were at Brasenose College. They were all quite different, but I think the common trend across all of them was that they were just getting you to speak your mind and go through your thought process. So sometimes the questions were a bit more experimental design and sort of a bit statistics based, and some of them were just trying to get you to think widely about a topic and maybe make suggestions for how you might research that area or explore that area. I think what I would say is try your best not to overcomplicate it in your mind and just speak your thought process, because the reality is that you will be on the correct wavelength, and if you're not, they will just guide you with some questions and you probably will get there. So don't be frightened about it. They're there to get the best out of you and to really just see where you're at, and yeah, just try and enjoy them if you can, because actually they're really interesting. And if you're interested in psychology, you, after maybe getting over the stress, you probably will come out and go, actually that was quite interesting and I enjoyed that conversation. So yeah, don't be nervous about them.
I had 3 interviews. One at the college that I applied for. So I actually applied for Worcester College, not Pembroke College. So I had 1 at Worcester and 2 at Pembroke. My Pembroke interviews, they're really great. I really enjoyed them. So obviously I was nervous before I came into the interview, and then meeting tutors and just having a quick brief introduction, then getting thrown straight into the deep end with questions. But the questions that they ask aren't like designed to just instantly trip you up. The way they ask the questions and then they probe you, or like, that sounds a bit interrogate, more like it's not an interrogation, it's more of a discussion. It's, you provide an answer, you say, oh, maybe it's this, and then the tutors or the interviewers will reply and try to maybe steer you along the right lines, or the lines that they're thinking of. And if you provide an answer that's probably not what they were thinking, but that is a really good and interesting point, then they'll point it out to you, and then they might also ask you and expand on that and what you think about it, which I think is basically what the interviews are for. They're just a model for a tutorial, and just to see if you fit in to that academic atmosphere. And
interview experience was a little bit mixed. I'd say on the whole it was probably pretty average. I mean, so my first one was actually at a different college. So usually you'd have 2 interviews for psychology, one at the college that you apply to, if you apply to one specifically, and then at a different one as well. So I had my first one at a different college, and when I arrived in the evening, I was told that I'd have one at about 8:30 the next morning. So it was a bit rushed, and I felt a bit alarmed about that. And it was snowing when I arrived as well, so I was really cold. And then the walk to the college was quite icy, and it got there, and I was super cold and out of breath from walking up this massive staircase. And I just felt that it didn't go, either brilliantly or awfully. I just felt very average about it and didn't really quite know what to take away from it. I felt like I hadn't said anything groundbreaking, so I wasn't sure it was a fair reflection. And one thing I didn't realize is how quickly the time goes. So they're about 20 to 30 minutes. And honestly, I felt like I'd only been speaking for 5 minutes. And you just feel like it's hard to give an accurate reflection of your ability and your thinking in such a short amount of time. And then my second interview at the college I applied to, Wadham, I felt that did go a lot better, and it was a lot more conversational. So I think different interviews conduct them in different ways. So the first one I was sat quite far apart from the interviewers across the room, and then the second one I was at the same desk as them, and it was very informal and kind of felt more conversational, and they were sort of leading me to the answers a little bit more, sort of like discussing it with me rather than a question and response. And it felt a lot more like a tutorial. So I think that's essentially what they're supposed to be like, kind of giving you the opportunity to work through an idea in the way that you would in the tutorial system. And, the interviewers or the tutors are there to try and nudge you through that process and see how you think, basically. So part of it is definitely trying to talk out through your ideas and make sure that they understand your thinking process throughout that whole time. And it also varies to some extent how much opportunity you're given to bring your own ideas into that. And what I mean by that is sometimes I'll ask you about your personal statement, or my second interview started with a very broad question of just, why did you pick psychology? And I felt that kind of enabled me to bring my own insight and my own interests to the interview, and then the conversation kind of went from there. But it's usually semi-structured, so I also was given a pre-reading to do and had some time to read through that and annotate it and then talk about that in the interview. And I was also given some very simple probability-based questions, I think, to coincide with like the statistics side of the course. So on the whole, I'd say it was quite. The second one I thought went a lot better than the first. The first I just didn't know what to take from it, and then the second I came out. It wasn't that I felt confident or that I felt it had gone well, that I was definitely going to get in. It was more just that I had actually kind of exhilarated me to be able to talk about a subject that I love with people who are experts in the field, and they were also really enthusiastic about the conversation. So the second one just didn't really feel like an interview as such, and more of a sort of discussion. Although obviously in the back of my mind I had the idea that it's an interview for a university the whole time. But my advice would be to try and enjoy it and try and use it as an opportunity to talk about a subject that you're hopefully really interested in. And remember that they're not trying to trick you out. In fact, they should be trying to encourage you throughout the whole process and try and get at your thinking. So if at any point you think you've come unstuck, that's completely fine. And actually, they don't mind if you get things wrong. They're not looking for a perfect answer at all. They're just looking for you to bring ideas to the table, really, and to try and understand if you'd suit the tutorial style system that Oxford has.
My interview experience was really fantastic. I would say even if I hadn't gotten in, it would have been an amazing opportunity and an amazing experience all round. They're really nerve-wracking initially. Obviously, when you go in, it's scary. You're confronted by academics. But for me personally, when we got into the discussion and we started to discuss the ideas, all of that kind of fizzled into the background, and I was just focused on the discussion at hand, and it became really natural.